32 years of marriage, and the thing that undoes you isn't the moment the doctor walks into the waiting room with that particular expression on his face. It's 3 weeks later, on a refrigerator, and see the yogurt she bought on the Wednesday before she went into the hospital, the one with the strawberry on the lid that she always got, and you always told her looked like every other yogurt, and she always told you that it wasn't, and you close the refrigerator door without taking anything out, and stand in the kitchen with nowhere to put your hands. My name is Dale Whitfield. I spent 28 years as a structural engineer for a mid-sized firm in Columbus, Ohio. The same desk for most of that time, the same commute on 315 North, the same lunch order from the sandwich place on Neal Avenue that never once changed despite my wife Lorraine's annual suggestion that I try something new. It is a deliberate life, and I have never apologized for it. I like things that stay where you put them. I like knowing what Tuesday is going to look like before Tuesday arrives. Lorraine was not a deliberate life. Lorraine was the most quietly extraordinary person I have ever known, and I met her at a neighborhood 4th of July party in 1992, at the home of people whose names I no longer remember, where she was standing near the back fence having what appeared to be a deeply serious conversation with someone else's golden retriever. I walked over because I was curious about anyone willing to give that kind of focused attention to a dog at a party, and she looked up and said, without any preamble at all, "He's worried about the fireworks. I'm telling him it's going to be fine." I said, "Is he buying it?" She thought about it for a second. "Not really," she said. "But I think he appreciates that someone's talking to him." That was it. That was the whole beginning. We were different people. I say that the way that becomes more accurate as the years go on. I was methodical. She was intuitive. I made lists. She made decisions. I worried about the structural integrity of things, and she was interested in what was happening inside them.
Dagsitam atin.
That is less about opposite and more about angle. Two people looking at the same object from positions that together make it three-dimensional. Lorraine had her work and I had mine. She ran a small consulting business she'd built over the years, client services. She called it early on, and later she just called it her practice, which was the words when she wanted to indicate that something had its own life and didn't require further explanation. She traveled for it occasionally. She kept a separate office downtown, on High Street, the kind of space above a dry cleaner that costs less than it looks. She kept the professional side of things tidy and separate in the specific way of someone who has learned that integration is not always possible and has made peace with that. I respected it. I am by nature a person who respects closed doors. I don't mean that as a metaphor. I mean I was raised by a man who believed that privacy was a form of dignity, and that belief settled into me early and stayed. I didn't know, in the months following her death on a Tuesday in March, that the closed doors had been containing something considerably larger than I understood. The call came to my cell phone at 7:20 in the evening, on a Tuesday in late April, 6 weeks after the funeral. I was sitting in the living room of our house on Thornwood Drive in Clintonville, a neighborhood of wide streets and old trees and houses that were built in the 1940s and have the particular settled quality of structures that have watched a lot of life go by. I had been sitting there with a book I was not reading and a television that was off, which is a thing I do now that I did not used to do, sit in rooms without any specific purpose. The caller identified himself as Stuart Adler, estate administrator. He apologized for calling without more notice and said he'd been trying to reach me by mail, which I believed because I had been letting the mail accumulate in a pile near the front door in the way of a man who has decided that whatever the mail contains can wait indefinitely. "Mr. Whitfield," he said, "your wife designated me to contact you regarding a specific asset transfer. She executed the documentation approximately 18 months ago. The transfer was structured outside of probate. The asset has been in your name since March 14th. I asked what asset. He told me. I wrote down the address he gave me. I thanked him, which is the thing you do when your brain is running a separate process from your mouth. After I hung up, I sat with the piece of paper in my hand for a long time. The living room around me, the house we'd bought in 2001, the furniture we'd chosen together, The photographs on the side table, all of it exactly where it had always been. And the piece of paper with an address in the short north that I had never in 32 years of marriage had any reason to write down. Lorraine, I thought. What did you do? I called our daughter Becca from the kitchen that evening. Rebecca, she goes by Becca, has since college, which was her right and I have honored it. Is 34, lives in Cincinnati with her husband Joel Ashworth and their 2 kids, and has Lorraine's quality of absorbing information quietly before she responds. She lets things settle before she speaks, which is rare in people under 40, and one of the qualities I most admire in her. I told her about Stuart Adler and the piece of paper. She was quiet for a moment in the specific way she's always been quiet when she's doing the most processing. Then she said, "Dad, do you know what it is?" "A commercial unit," I said. "On Taft Alley, off North High." Stuart called it a studio suite. Did Mom ever mention it? No. Another quiet. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to call our attorney tomorrow morning. Then I'm going to go look at it." "Do you want me to come?" I thought about that. About Becca, sitting in the passenger seat of my car, while I drove to look at something I didn't understand yet, in a building I didn't know Lorraine had used, and how much of what I was feeling I wanted to have worked out before I shared it with my daughter, whose grief was already a full-time job without me adding my own unprocessed complications to it. "Not yet," I said. "Let me see what it is first." My attorney, Warren Mash, practices out of an office on Broad Street in a building that is across the street from the State House, and has the particular institutional weight of a place where a lot of significant paperwork has been signed. He's 62, direct, and has the no preamble quality of a man who bills by the hour and considers small talk a form of waste for both parties. I've been his client for 14 years and appreciate him more each time. I scanned and emailed him the documents Stuart Adler had left in my mailbox. I finally went through the pile, and he reviewed them before our 9 o'clock meeting. "The documentation is clean," he said. "The LLC was structured correctly. Transfer to you is valid. There are no liens and no disputes in the title." "She didn't tell me about it," I said. "I understand." Warren looked at the documents, then at me. "The LLC has been active for 9 years. It paid its lease, its business insurance, its quarterly costs on a regular schedule. It carries no debt. The unit itself is owned by the LLC outright." I asked him the question that had been waiting since the previous evening. "What does it list as its business purpose?" He found the page. "Management Consulting and Client Advisory." He set it down. "Dale, I want to suggest you go see the unit before you make any decisions about what to do with it. I'd also recommend you find out who Lorraine's operating contacts were. There's a registered agent on the LLC, a woman named Iris Calloway." Iris Calloway. A name I had never heard in 32 years of marriage. "I'll go to the unit first," I said. Warren looked at me with the expression of a man who has sat across from people in moments like this before and has learned that there is a certain kind of information that can only be absorbed in a specific order. "Whatever you find in there," he said, "call me before you decide anything." The Short North is a neighborhood that runs along High Street north of downtown Columbus. Galleries, restaurants, older brick storefronts, the kind of place where something was always being converted or opened or reimagined throughout the years we'd lived in the city. Taft Alley is a small perpendicular street just off North High, the kind of block that isn't on any tourist's list, but has enough character that the rents have been quietly climbing for a decade. The building at the address Stuart Adler had given me was 3 stories, brick, built in the 1920s by the look of the ornamentation above the windows. Ground floor was a framing shop. Second floor had 2 units, third floor, 1. A woman named Charlotte Reeves managed the building. She was waiting for me in the small lobby when I arrived on a Thursday morning at 10 o'clock, having been briefed by Stuart Adler apparently, because she greeted me by name and offered condolences before I had said anything at all. "We were sorry to hear about Mrs. Whitfield," she said. "She was a wonderful presence in the building." I stopped walking. "She was here often?" Charlotte's expression did the thing that expressions do when they're deciding how much belongs to them to say. "She kept regular hours, a few days a week, sometimes more. We always knew when she was in because she'd stop and chat on her way up." A pause. "The unit is on the 3rd floor, I'll take you up, or I'll go up alone, I said. The staircase was original to the building, a banister that was solid without being showy, the smell of old wood and clean paint. 3 flights. At the top, a single door with a brushed nickel handle and a key card reader, the kind that has replaced locks in most commercial buildings in the last decade. I stood at the door with the key card Stuart Adler had included in the packet. She wanted you to have this, I thought, without knowing yet whether that was true or what it meant. I pressed the card to the reader. The light turned green. I pushed the door open. The unit was one open floor. High ceilings, the original brick on the north wall, 3 tall vet windows facing the valley that let in the particular clean light of a Columbus spring morning. A sitting area near the windows with 2 low chairs and a coffee table. A long work table against the east wall with a lamp and a chair, and the neat organized surface of someone who uses a space seriously. A small kitchen alcove in the back left corner. Bookshelves along the south wall, 2 of them full, all of it quiet, all of it hers, unmistakably. The same quality of organization I recognized from her home office, the same taste in furniture, unpretentious and good, chosen for function with an eye for what function can look like when someone cares about it. I registered all of that in the first few seconds. And in the next second, I registered the woman standing near the work table. She was 60 or so, with cloak-cropped gray hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, in a cardigan and dark slacks, with a folder open on the table in front of her. She had heard the door and turned, and her expression was not surprise exactly, more like recognition arriving later than expected. She straightened up slowly. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, "I'm Iris Calloway." There is a specific kind of stillness that happens when your brain is handling several things at once, and none of them are finished yet. I stood in Lorraine's studio and registered, the woman who had appeared in Warren's documents, standing in a space my wife had used for 9 years without mentioning it to me, with a folder on the table. "How did you get in?" I asked. My voice was even. "I teach Sunday school at our church on Tuesdays. I've learned to keep my voice even." "I have a key," Iris said. "Lorraine gave it to me. I've had one for years. I came to collect some documents that belong to my own files before the unit transfers, and I wasn't certain when you'd." She paused. "I should have called. I am sorry, I mean that." "Who are you?" I said. She closed the folder and held it in both hands, the posture of someone who is prepared for a conversation and intends to have it with care. "I was Lorraine's closest professional partner for the last 8 years. We worked together on client management consulting, genuine consulting, organizational strategy, what companies hire you for when they're navigating something complicated and they need someone without a visible stake in the outcome to come in and assess it cleanly." She looked at me steadily. "Your wife was extraordinarily good at that work. She had an instinct for where organizations were actually broken versus where they thought they were broken. That's rarer than it sounds." I looked at the studio, at the work table, at the bookshelves. "She used this for the work," I said. "Client meetings, yes. Confidential conversations need neutral ground. Not the client's offices, not her home. This was her professional space." Iris paused. "Mr. Whitfield, I know you didn't know about this. Lorraine told me you didn't. Did she tell you why she didn't tell me?" Iris thought about how to answer that for a moment. "She said you were the most genuinely settled person she'd ever known. That you knew exactly who you were, and you lived completely inside that. She said it as one of the best things she'd ever say about anyone." A pause. "She also said that her work required a degree of confidentiality that she didn't want to ask you to carry. The clients were sensitive engagements. She thought that if you knew, you'd carry it, the way you carry everything, and she didn't want to put that weight on you when there was no reason for you to have it." I walked to the window. Taft Alley below, a few parked cars, a delivery truck, the ordinary Thursday morning of a neighborhood I'd driven past hundreds of times without knowing my wife spent her working days in the building above it. "Sit down," I said. "Tell me what she actually did." Iris sat in one of the chairs near the window. I sat in the other. She told me. The work was organizational consulting in the truest sense, not the kind that produces a report and bills 100 hours and leaves the same problems with different documentation. The kind where a company in genuine trouble, a leadership crisis, a board fracture, a regulatory exposure, a founder being pressured out, needed someone without a corporate footprint to come in, understand the actual landscape, and provide strategy that was clean and uncompromised. Lorraine had built a reputation for that work over 9 years. Her clients were regional and national companies, some of them names I would have recognized, though Iris didn't use names. She loved it, Iris said. Not sentimentally, factually. She was energized by problems. She used to say that most organizational trouble is really just a communication failure wearing a business suit. Said she had a gift for translating what people couldn't say to each other into something that could be addressed. She told me Lorraine had talked about my work often, about the structural engineering, about the logic of it, the way a good design accounts for load before anything else. She said you were the reason she could do what she did, Iris said. That having someone at home who was completely solid, completely himself, gave her the freedom to move. She said you were the load-bearing wall. She looked at me directly. She meant that as the highest possible compliment. She just never figured out how to say it to you in a way that didn't also require explaining everything else. I sat with that for a moment. The load-bearing wall. 32 years of Lorraine, and she had found, apparently, a way to describe our marriage that sounded exactly like her. The studio, I said. Why hold a property? Practicality first. A controlled, neutral space she could use whenever she needed it without the variables of a hotel conference room or a third-party office. Iris looked at the bookshelves, and I think she needed a place that was entirely her professional self. Separate from wife and mother, the Thornwood house was full of her, but it was full of all of her at once. This was just one part. She paused. She loved the other parts, Mr. Whitfield. She loved your life together. This wasn't an escape. It was a room of her own. I nodded. It was the most Lorraine thing anyone who was essentially a stranger had ever said to me. The folder, I said. What's in it? Documents she prepared for you. Summary of the LLC's current financial standing, contact information for the accounts, and a letter. Iris picked up the folder and held it toward me. She prepared it around the time she did the asset transfer. When she handed it to me, she said, "If something happens to me and Dale comes to the studio, give him this. He'll read the whole thing before he does anything." She was very sure about that. I took the folder. She was sure I'd read the whole thing. After 32 years, that was still Lorraine. Accurate about the people she loved in the specific way that meant she had been paying close attention the entire time. I didn't know yet what was on the third page of the folder. I didn't know yet about the man named Terrence Good, or what he was going to attempt when he found out the LLC had been transferred. I didn't know about the insurance adjuster who would call in May with questions about Lorraine's professional activities. I didn't know about the decision Becca was going to push me to before the spring was out. I stood in Lorraine's studio on the third floor of a brick building in the short north, with the Thursday light coming through the windows and a folder in my hands, and I felt something I had not expected to feel in that room. Not betrayal, not anger, steadiness. The same steadiness I'd always had, and the strange comfort of recognizing that she had counted on exactly that. There is a particular quality to reading words that were written by someone who is no longer alive. Not old texts, not emails dashed off on a Tuesday about whether to pick up milk. A letter prepared with deliberate care, written by someone who understood that you might receive it without them. Every word has the weight of someone choosing it for you, specifically in their absence. I sat in the chair by the window in Lorraine's studio after Iris left at noon. She went quietly, with a card and an offer to answer any questions I had later, and I was grateful for the absence of performance in how she did it, and I opened the folder. The letter was on top. Lorraine's handwriting, the neat left-leaning cursive that I recognized from 32 years of birthday cards and grocery lists, and the occasional note she'd leave on my desk when she wanted me to find something and not have to say it out loud. Dale, if you're reading this, something happened that I didn't plan for. I'm sorry for that part. I'm sorry you're reading this without me there to say it in person, which is the way I always preferred to do things I should have done sooner. Let me tell you what I couldn't figure out how to say while I was alive. The work was real. Everything Iris tells you is accurate. I am not going to pretend I kept it from you only for your sake, because that wouldn't be completely true. I kept it partly for mine. I needed something that was entirely my own. Not wife, not mother, not the person who knows where the insurance documents are and whose name is on the school emergency contact list. I needed a professional self that existed independent of all that. And I was afraid that explaining it would change it somehow. Make it smaller. Invite a kind of attention that would make it harder to protect. That was my reasoning. I know it was also, in some ways, the easier choice. I'm not going to insult you by calling it entirely selfless. What I need you to know is that none of it was about you. Not 1 minute of it was a statement about our life or what I thought of it. That life was the one I chose. You were the one I chose. 32 years later, still you. Still the man at the 4th of July party who asked a dog a reasonable question and then asked me one. The practical things, because I know you, and I know the practical things are what will help you move forward right now. Page 2 is the LLC summary. The accounts are on page 3. Warren Mash has a sealed envelope I sent him 8 months ago. Tell him you've read the letter and he'll know what to do. The studio is yours to handle however makes sense. Sell the lease, let it go, keep it. Whatever is right for where your life goes from here. I chose that building because the light in the morning is good and because it's 5 minutes from the house and because I wanted to know that if you ever found it, you'd understand immediately why I liked it there. There is one thing I need you to do before you do anything else. Please read page 4. I loved you every day, Dale. Every quiet, steady, Tuesday morning coffee day of it. Lorraine and I read it twice. Then I sat with it for a while. The light through the windows had shifted by then, moving across the floor the way it does when enough time has passed that you stop noticing it moving. She chose me, I thought. Every day in all the rooms I didn't know about. I turned to page 4. 3 paragraphs. The first described a man named Terrence Good, a former client who had, during a restructuring engagement 8 years ago, agreed to provide referral arrangements to Lorraine's LLC in exchange for a finder's fee on 2 contracts. The arrangement was documented and legal. Terrence had been paid what was agreed. The engagement had concluded. The second paragraph said, Terrence is going to contact you. He may suggest that the arrangement gave him a continuing interest in the LLC's revenue, or that he has some claim on the studio or the accounts. He does not. A business attorney named Sylvia Chen, at the firm Peterson and Marsh on Nationwide Boulevard, has all the documentation. Do not talk to Terrence without talking to Sylvia first. Do not sign anything he puts in front of you. The third paragraph said, Terrence is a person who bets on the disorientation of people in grief. He assumed when he called me 6 months ago, and yes, he called me, and that's when I wrote this, that I would be persuaded by the way he framed things. I wasn't. You won't be either. You are considerably more difficult to rattle than you give yourself credit for. Trust that. I set the page down. She saw it coming. 6 months ago, she had received a call from this man, and rather than be rattled, she had written a 4-page briefing for a contingency she hoped would never happen and handed it to Stuart Adler with instructions for the exact sequence in which I would receive it. I called Warren Mash from the studio at 2 in the afternoon. She left a letter, I said. She mentioned a sealed envelope. I have it. She asked me to keep it until you called me from the studio address specifically. She said if you called from there, it meant you'd found the letter and read it in order, including page 4. A pause. She was very precise about the sequence. She was precise about everything, I said. What's in the envelope? Full financial accounting of the LLC and the contact information for Sylvia Chen. Dale. He stopped. I'd like you to look at page 3 of the folder before we discuss the next steps. Look at the bottom line and call me back. I found page 3. I looked at the bottom line. I looked at it again. Warren, I said. Yes. This is what I think it is? LLC value, the investment accounts she held in her name, and the current lease value of the studio. A pause. She was very successful, Dale. The clients were significant, and the fees matched that. Lorraine had told me, years ago, when I'd asked once about the business, the one question I'd asked in 9 years, that it was doing fine, that she was comfortable with where it was going. I had taken that at face value, because she was not a person who minimized things. Fine, I now understood had been a word she'd chosen for its load-bearing capacity. Fine, applied to what I was looking at on page 3, was the most quietly spectacular understatement of our 32-year marriage. Terrence Good called my cell phone at 4:15 that afternoon. I was still in the studio, having spent the last 90 minutes sitting in Lorraine's chair at the work table, making a list. Because I am a list person, and crisis does not change your fundamental nature, of everyone I needed to call and in what order, I let it go to voicemail. The message was smooth in the specific way of a man who has done this before. Condolences. Mention of a long-standing professional arrangement with Lorraine, suggestion that there were matters of mutual interest he'd very much like to discuss at my convenience. I forwarded it to Warren. Then I called Sylvia Chen. Sylvia was 55, precise, with the direct manner of a business attorney who has spent her career in exactly the situation she was now describing to me, with a clarity that I found deeply reassuring. She walked me through Terrence Good's original arrangement, the agreed fee structure, the documentation of every payment made over the course of the engagement, and the formal closure agreement with his signature. He has no claim, she said. Not on the LLC, not on the studio, not on anything in your wife's estate. He acknowledged the termination of the arrangement in writing 3 years ago. He knows that, then why is he calling? Because he's assuming you don't know that. He does this. Tests people in the early period after a loss, when the paperwork is unfamiliar and the emotions are high. He assumes you were kept in the dark about the business. He's right about that, but he's wrong about what it means. A pause. He's betting you don't know what you have. Call him back and give him my number. That's all you need to say. I called Terrence Good the next morning. His voice was practiced warmth. The condolences, the long-standing arrangement, the implication that there were unresolved matters that really ought to be addressed soon, for both our sakes. Terrence, I said, I want to give you a phone number. A pause. Her name is Sylvia Chen. She has the full documentation from your arrangement with Lorraine, including the termination agreement with your signature. I'd suggest reaching out to her directly. The practiced warmth in his voice did something complicated. I'm not sure what impression Lorraine may have. She left me very thorough notes, I said. Have a good day. I hung up. I called Becca that evening and told her everything in the order that made sense. The work first, then Iris Calloway, then the letter, then the financial summary on page 3, then Terrence, then the resolution. I wanted her to have the context before the numbers, because the context was what made the numbers comprehensible rather than simply staggering. When I got to page 3, she was quiet for a long time. Then, Dad, I know, Mom was doing all of that the whole time? 9 years of the current work, something similar before that, smaller. Another long quiet. Becca does this. She lets things find their level before she speaks. The studio, she said eventually. She gave you the studio specifically. Yes, she wanted you to have something you could stand in, Becca said. She knew you. You needed to see it before you'd believe it was real. You needed to put your hands on the thing. I looked around the studio, the work table, the light, the bookshelves, with Lorraine's books in their particular order. My daughter, 34 years old, with her mother's perceptiveness and my patience settled underneath it. Yeah, I said. I think that's right. Are you going to sell the lease? I thought about the Thursday morning light through the windows. About Lorraine's handwriting on the letter. About the load-bearing wall. Not yet, I said. The insurance adjuster, a man named Alan Ferris, called in early May with routine questions about Lorraine's professional activities. Standard procedure for a claim of her policy's size, he said. The call lasted 20 minutes. I referred him to Warren Mash for the estate documentation and to Sylvia Chen for the business records. The inquiry closed in under 3 weeks. I went back to work at the engineering firm in the second week of May. Same desk, same commute, same lunch order from the place on Neal Avenue. My colleagues handled it the way that colleagues handle the good turn of someone after a significant loss, with restraint, and normalcy, and the specific, small acts of consideration that people perform when they understand that what someone needs is to be treated like themselves again. I was working that month on a review of a pedestrian bridge project in Westerville. Load calculations, material tolerances, the ways in which a structure handles stress, that isn't uniformly distributed. I have always found the work satisfying in a way that is difficult to explain to people who don't do it. The clarity of physical law, the honesty of a structure that either holds or doesn't. That month I found myself thinking about it differently, about the ways in which things that look simple from the outside are carrying more than they appear to, about the load that is invisible until something makes it visible, about what it means for a structure to bear weight without advertising that it's doing so. Lorraine had called me the load-bearing wall. She had meant it as a compliment, and I had received it as one. But I was also beginning to understand, in the particular way that understanding arrives slowly when it is large, that she had been one too. The whole time, bearing things quietly, in a room 3 miles from our house, with the spring light coming through the windows, and Iris Calloway across the table. My friend and neighbor Ted Kowalski came for dinner on a Friday in late May, the way he'd been doing once or twice a month since March. Ted has been my next-door neighbor on Thornwood for 16 years and has the quality of a man who understands that some company is better kept close to silent. We ate at the kitchen table, Lorraine's kitchen, and afterward we sat with coffee and he asked how I was doing in the specific way that means he wants the real answer. Better, I said. Strange, but better. The studio? I'd told Ted about it a few weeks earlier. He'd listened without interruption and then said, Lorraine was always the most capable person in any room, which I found, and still find, entirely accurate. I went back twice, I said. Sat in there for a while. Becca thinks we should use it when she and Joel bring the kids up. Better than them all stacked in the guest room. What do you think? I picked up my coffee. I think Lorraine would have liked that. She always said the studio needed more life in it. Ted nodded. She said that to you? No, I said. She said it to Iris apparently, but it sounds right. We were quiet for a moment. The house around us, the particular Friday evening, quiet of a street where the trees are old and the houses are settled and nothing moves very fast. Dale. Ted looked at me across the table. Are you okay, actually? I thought about how to answer that honestly, about the studio and the folder and the letter in Lorraine's left-leaning cursive, about Terrence Good, whose smooth voice had gone complicated when I read him Sylvia Chen's name and said have a good day, about Becca on the video call, saying she gave you something you could stand in, and the way that had landed like a key, finding a lock it was made for. I was a 61-year-old structural engineer in Clintonville, Ohio. I drove a 2017 Subaru Outback in dark blue, which Lorraine had always said was the most Dale Whitfield car that had ever existed. I owned, in a building in the short north, a third-floor studio with brick walls and good morning light that my wife had used for 9 years to do work that had turned out to be extraordinary and had left me better taken care of than I had known. I had been loved, for 32 years, by a person so thorough in that love that she had arranged for a stranger to call me 6 weeks after the funeral with a key card and a folder and a letter that knew me well enough to say the practical things first. Yeah, I said to Ted. I think I am. He raised his coffee mug. I raised mine. Outside, Thornwood Drive was doing its May thing. The maples fully leafed, the light going golden, the way it does in the late afternoons of central Ohio Springs, the neighborhood settling into the particular comfortable quiet that old streets have when the evening is coming and nothing is being asked of anyone. Lorraine had always said, spring in Clintonville was the best argument for living somewhere ordinary, that the extraordinary things were everywhere if you knew what you were looking at. 32 years with her, and she was still teaching me how to look.